welcome to you all to Evolution's Digital Enterprise Architecture Summit. Delighted for you to be able to join us today at the second such event that we've held. This time we have well over 1,000 people in attendance, which is fantastic. So welcome to you all. We have a very full agenda over the coming 2 days. We're running sessions across all time zones and across the 3 regions in which we operate. So that means we have architects joining us from Australia and Asia Pacific, and through the Indian subcontinent, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and of course across the Americas. So welcome to you all. So just to say, I'm Peter Collins. I'm the EMEA Region Manager, based in the UK. Indeed, we'll be based at our London office, but I guess like most people now, I'm working from home. And obviously this situation is the backdrop, the reason for many of the new challenges that enterprise architects have faced of late. And I'm sure this is going to be reflected in some of the presentations that we're going to hear. Good, okay. So with that, I'm delighted to be able to introduce our first speaker, and it's Dr. Tim O'Neill, who's one of the founders of Evolution, and therefore someone I hope many of you will have already been aware of. It may be new to learn, though, that Tim is a self-confessed sports geek, very much of the data-driven kind. So Tim, over to you to tell us all about how to win at EA sprints and marathons.
Thank you, Peter. And you can see here that agenda that Peter sort of talked through there. So I know that's on our website as well, and you've got it in your emails. So yep, so this is the kickoff session. So I'm here in Australia at the moment, so it's early evening for me here. Lots of the sessions are on kind of business daytime in Europe and in the Americas. So yeah, kicking things off, as Peter alluded to, we're trying to draw together some parallels and what we've found with lots of these different topics. As we've been thrown this curveball, and there's already a metaphor. We're having to find some interesting ways of understanding and reconciling this new mode of operation that we've all got. And so we tried to put this presentation together with that in mind, to try to helpfully just draw a few little obvious points to show how these things, these other, what you might think are disjoint fields, actually are quite complementary, and you can start to learn from each of them. So that's what I'm going to hopefully run through today. As Peter said, though, you can grab the slides and the recording later. A little background about the company. Obviously, Evolution is the company, ABACUS is the product. We've been around for almost 20 years, so right around the turn of the century we started, building on a lot of research out of the University of Technology in Sydney, which was where I was a professor. But yeah, we've gone on to expand all around the world since then. Peter mentioned the 3 regions that we break the world up into sort of 8-hour time zones, so we can follow the sun, as they say. But we have offices in all the major markets. We've got over 3,000 companies in over 100 countries now. So most countries we've got someone near you, obviously a lot of you guys that have joined, I'm sure, are clients of ours. And yes, as Peter said, I guess I'm a self-confessed sporty nerd, and I'm not sure what there's always a bit of a debate between the difference between a geek and a nerd, and I'm not sure which is better or worse, and not sure which I'd rather be, but either way, I certainly am somewhere in that spectrum, and that's what I try and pull you through together, some of the sort of crossovers that I've found between those two, dare I say, obsessions that I've had for the last, maybe 20, 30 years. I'd also like to point out that I'm not alone. While this does draw these 2 passions of mine together, which is, enterprise architecture, which started out as architecture way before enterprise architecture even really existed. For me, I started out as an engineer and learned all about, obviously architecture and software architecture first back in the 90s. But then, in the last 20 years, I've gone on to, understand the whole world of enterprise architecture. But at the same time, I've also been into sports, and I'll sort of talk about that over the coming slides, and I'm not alone. So while it might seem like a bit of an oxymoron, a bit of an opposites, sports and sort of nerdiness or geekiness, the person you can see on the screen here, his name's Adam Ondra. He's a Czech person. He's the current world champion in rock climbing. So you can see that he's a little bit of a crossover between, kind of Harry Potter and maybe the Hulk. He's a very, very strong man. He's over 6 foot tall, very, very strong guy. Also, I'm not sure if you all know, climbing's one of the sports I've been passionate about for many years. It's in the Olympics. It was obviously going to be on right around now in Tokyo, which has been delayed to next year. But so climbing for the first time is going to be in the Summer Olympics next year. So keep an eye out for that. Now, the course for today, or sort of giving the headline topics that I'm going to try to address. So we've got 5. I'll go into these in bigger detail, but essentially we're going to try and look at how you might want to pace yourself as an enterprise architect, and what you can learn from obviously pacing in sports. What sort of milestones, what sort of KPIs, what sort of personal records you want to try and hit along the way, just like in sports. And as Peter alluded to, being very data driven about how you do that. Then there's the element of trust, and I'll look at that and explore how that's dealt with, and obviously the issues there in the sporting field, and how we can, of course, build trust in our enterprise field. Really something about the skills you need. What do you need to be a good EA athlete, as we're calling it? Similarly to lots of athletes, what skills do they have in the sporting field? And finally, we'll look at, of course, how do you improve those skills? How do you become a well-rounded architect in this case, or obviously a well-rounded athlete? What can you learn from the field of sports for that? Okay, so kicking off the first area, which is what we've coined pacing yourself. So making sure that you're obviously hitting the things at the timelines that you're trying to set for yourself. And that's kind of the headline of this topic. It's a marathon and a sprint. Enterprise architecture, we can use all those other metaphors like, battles and wars. There's a tactical short time aspect to it, and then there's a long-term strategic or endurance-based aspect to it. As Peter alluded to, the pace that business is setting is getting faster and faster. Who knew there was going to be these curveballs that we've taken this year in the last 3 to 4 months? And architects, we have to keep up with all the modern techniques and technology, and try to stay abreast of all the latest trends. And you can see here, if you look at what's on the people's feet here, how many Nikes there are. This is a Gold Coast Marathon for a couple of years ago, where the Vaporflies only just come out, so you can see a few of those pairs there. So obviously keeping up with all of the latest trends is something that architects need to do as well. But you have to pace yourself. You can't start out too fast. Obviously, you're gonna really destroy yourself if you do that in something like a marathon. But at the same time, you can't dawdle. You got to hit your race pace, pretty quickly. Most of the modern advice is to run at a constant pace. Okay, so that means you're hopefully going to hold whatever the frequency of delivery that you want to do as a constant thing. Okay. Now, is that a monthly update? Is that a quarterly update? Quarterly reviews? Each company has their own kind of cycle that they're trying to work towards. Now, if you can, obviously try and run what's referred to as a negative split. Try to finish a bit faster than maybe you start. It's much better than doing what's called bonking, which is basically where you completely blow and your body fills with lactic acid and you slow down at the end. So, under promise, over deliver. All of those one-liners that we know. But fundamentally, it is about time to value. You can't dawdle. You've got to deliver something. And this is a graphic we've put together that sort of shows a bit of a kind of a ranking of the kind of this delivering time to value. ABACUS and Evolution, we're recognized as the fastest time to value on the market. We can stand up a repository overnight. That's no trouble. Some, unfortunately, of our competitors, though, it might take them up to 12 months to get that stuff set up. The efforts involved in getting servers and all those kinds of things. And a lot of it is, kind of big bang about how their methodology works. We definitely advocate a much more iterative methodology. Indeed, most of our clients have already got ABACUS up and running before we even really start to talk to them. We have free trials and all that kind of stuff. Technically, there's some real advantages that we have behind the scenes too that help this. We have a very adaptable repository, which means that the repository will adapt to the data, not the other way around. We use phrases like when you expect there to be extract, transform, load, ETL. There's not really any need for a transform. You can literally just upload your favorite spreadsheets, import your favorite Visio things, get a repository very quickly. But that does lead us to the next thing, which is be careful. Don't fill up on junk. Don't eat too much sweets, right? It's very easy to get poor data into the repository. Okay, so you've got to be careful what you upload. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. There's all those adages. Sorry, and the ubiquitous phrase "garbage in" versus "garbage out." And we'll look at that a lot more later. But just be careful you don't fill up on junk. Don't just upload your favorite spreadsheet with 1,000 printers on it. Is that any value to anyone? it's going to end up being what we call a data island. It sits there without any relationships to anything else. Architecture is fundamentally about building the relationships between things, so you have a line of sight from high-level business goals and objectives all the way through to the tin and wires that might fulfill those. But don't put things in that aren't necessary. So fundamentally, how do you build up this value and build it up incrementally? Think about the use cases that you need to address. It should never be thought of, what we do should never be a silo or a black hole or an ivory tower where, all this information goes and nothing comes back of value. So find a use case that already has buy-in, okay? And obviously already has funding, already has resourcing, has people who are willing to work and work with you. This is a collaborative exercise. Something that's got a very fast turnaround time. And again, don't be big bang about this, be iterative, okay? All of those phrases like, don't confuse precision with accuracy. We could give you the wrong answer to 5 decimal places, right? So don't worry about that too much. Be a bit general about it. Make sure you get your disclaimers out there and you say, look, we've done a quick rough piece of analysis first. Let's deliver that. Let's get feedback. Let's be cyclical about this. Let's be democratic about this. So be pragmatic. Now, the flip side of that is you've got to be prepared to take some flack. One of the things we'll talk about later is the architects have to have pretty thick skin, right? I used to talk about your mud jacket or whatever. People are going to fling mud at you. You're potentially the bearer of bad news. So you need to be pretty comfortable with your position, but also pretty humble and pretty open about how you came to that position, and try to be quantitative. Okay, subjective, statements are always going to be a bit more vague and a bit easier to challenge. But if you can be quantitative, again, with the caveat of, the wrong answer to 5 decimal places, but, give some quantitative statements if possible. So when we look at pacing, I'm sure most of you recognize the person on the left. Some of you might recognize the person on the right, even though it's pretty fuzzy. The guy on the left, his name's Roger Bannister. Hopefully you all know he was the first person to break the 4-minute mile. He did that around the Iffley Road track in Oxford, which is where I've lived the last 15 years. So when he hit his 4-minute mile, this was over 60 years ago now, he was right on pace. He did. So I don't know if you're familiar with the 400-meter track, of course. When you're doing a mile, which is 1,609 meters, that extra 9 meters, don't forget that. It's basically 4 laps and a little bit, right? So he hit the first lap, which was actually technically like 409 meters because you start back a bit from the finish line. He hit that in 60. So he went out a little hard. Second lap, 60. Third lap, 60. And the last lap, 59.6. So he ran a 3:59.6 for his mile, and that was it. History was made. I train on that same track. Hopefully you can recognize that church steeple in the background there. So about a year ago now, back in August last year, I went for a hot lap on the anniversary actually of his, him breaking the 4-minute mile. And I ran a 5:29. So I don't know if anyone's impressed by that or not. It's pretty good for someone certainly my age. And my pacing, I aim to go out in 82-second laps. Okay, that's what you need to do to obviously hit a sub 5:30 mile. So I did 81. So just like Roger, or Sir Roger, I should call him. I went out a bit fast and I paid for it a little bit at the end. So I did an 81, an 82, an 82, and an 84. So I definitely lost a bit at the end. So I wouldn't call that bonking. And I think there's some room for improvement, but I'm pretty happy with that, 5:29. So pacing, obviously go out, constant pace, and make sure that you stick to it. All right, so the second one I wanted to sort of look at is now, setting yourself milestones and setting yourself goals and objectives and hitting them, hitting your personal records, making sure that you achieve things which are obviously of value. The first thing to look at here is to think more like baseball and the World Series rather than the Olympics. So I'm not sure, obviously baseball's a big sport in America. I'm not sure if everyone on the call appreciates how many games a year baseballers play. It's 162 in the regular season before they get to the playoffs. Okay, we're talking about multiple games per week. Okay, as opposed to the Olympics, which is, as we know, every 4 years now. Technically, it's going to be in, 5-year gap this time, coming up in 2021 now. So fundamentally, you've got to be continually delivering value. I obviously wouldn't advocate you deliver something every couple of days, but needless to say, you should be delivering value pretty regularly. Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Something like that. you have to work as a team. You know, baseball's a baseball team, and though you've only got the, you know, the people on the diamond, you need to be thinking like a team, thinking about all of the front office, back office staff. We'll talk about that later, but you've got to be collaborating. And you need to follow a playbook. I really got into baseball when I lived in America back in the 90s. I was there when Cal Ripken was on his streak. He played over 1,000 games without missing, never got injured. But the playbooks and I'm sure you know all about the hand signals they all do, and the collaboration between the, you know, the dugout, the first baseman, the pitcher, all that stuff, the interplay there, I find very fascinating. So following the playbook, which in our world, of course, is having some single source of truth. Everyone needs to know the plays, right? And they need to know the signals. They need to be working together. I guess a quick thing. So I used to live in Washington, D.C. in America back in the 90s. So I'm not sure if everyone knows who won the World Series last year, but it was the Washington Nationals. So I'm pretty proud of that. They won 4-3 against the Astros back in October. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. So cheekily, I guess, I really just wanted to talk about the World Series in our field, of course. So I don't really need to say too much about these. I'm sure you all know, but we're very proud of our position there on both the Forrester Wave and the Magic Quadrant, and how we've been received in the market. Obviously, we'll keep pushing and we'll keep trying and hope to maintain that position going forward. How did we get there? 20 years ago, when we started this company, we had a vision, which was to use data as a way to drive decision-making in the enterprise architecture field. Before then, a lot of it was diagram heavy, right? So it was all about, you know, Zachman frameworks, drawing all your different views, all the different types of diagrams, case tools, you know, drawing data flow diagrams, structure charts, you know, structure analysis, structure design, all that sort of stuff. So it was very diagram heavy. So we came to this field trying to bring a whole database, a data-based, data-focused approach to it. Indeed, ABACUS, the product that we coined back then in the late 90s, stands for Architecture-Based Analysis of Complex Systems. I hope I haven't given away one of the answers to the pub quiz, actually, by saying that. Anyway, pay attention. Right, so maximize the value of your data, right? Data, or Australians call them data, sorry. I know English and British call them data. Sorry, I haven't lost my Australian heritage. So it's a shared asset. It's something that we all need to own. We all need to be involved in producing and maintaining. It's something that, of course, can bring incredible value to the organization. But don't underestimate it. It can take a lot of data, a lot of data to be able to build a roadmap. Now, we've got presentations we do all about the different types of roadmaps. Indeed, the first type of roadmap, you might only have a single field, and that's it. One property is enough to be able to build a roadmap, and it might be a simple heat map. So needless to say, maximize the value of your data. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Moneyball story. There was a book written about 20 years ago, in fact, right around when we started as well. It was made into a pretty popular movie in about, I think it was 2010 or 11 with Brad Pitt. It followed the Oakland Athletics, which is a baseball team back in the 2002 season, I think it was, and they basically they were very understaffed, under budget. They were struggling, but they brought in a data scientist, okay, a university graduate, who had an idea to try and bring data science, it wasn't called that back then, but of course, you know, numbers and metrics to the sport of baseball. And so using that technique, they identified players that were just undervalued, you know, literally in the free transfer market, they were undervalued. They composed a team, and they went on in 1 year to win the 2002 American League West title. So, you know, within 1 year, using a data science-based approach, made a winning team. They did lose the American League championship and obviously not make it to the World Series, but in 1 year, they showed what was possible. The coach was headhunted then, or attempted to be headhunted by the Boston Red Sox, turned it down, was offered, I can't remember, 12 million or something like that, a massive salary back at the time to try and bring this technique to the Red Sox, which was a heavily funded, turned it down. 2 years later, the Boston Red Sox won the World Series using the same techniques. So, you know, it revolutionized the game of baseball, this data science-based approach. And obviously, I'd like to think we've had a hand in revolutionizing the enterprise architecture field by bringing data as the key technique to getting value out of an enterprise architectural approach. So you don't have to do diagram-driven or data-driven. You can do both. Okay, and that's what we advocate. There's different stakeholders are obviously sympathetic to different pieces. What does that mean in reality? Behind the scenes in ABACUS, we have the ability to do what we call no-code algorithms. So I'm sure you've all seen no-code stuff. You know, your kids are, you know, doing Scratch and things like that. You know, they're all coding. Um, but yeah, so no code is a thing that we've brought to the enterprise architecture market so that you can actually put these types of techniques into the hands of the broader business community, all of your different stakeholders. The algorithm that we're looking at on the right here, this no code algorithm, what it's doing is it's taking a score that's been put on applications. Okay, so that score might have come from a technique like time with tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate. It might have come from 4 R's, retain, refresh, retire, redesign. It might have been surveys. People in your business might have surveyed, and you might have averaged those things. But either way, somehow you've got a score. Some sort of health score or fit score for your application. Because you've got a connected repository, of course, your applications are being used by various business capabilities, business processes. So what we're showing in this algorithm is a simple block-based algorithm here. I think there's 4 or 5 blocks, where basically we take the average of the applications that are being used to deliver a service or a capability. We average those scores and attribute that score to the capability that's being delivered. So you have some sort of technical score, or the fit score, underneath each of these processes. And from that, you can, of course, do something like a heat map, which is we're showing here on the right, where you're looking at a business capability map that's using APQC's PCF approach. So it's only, we're showing the top 2 levels here, and you're basically coloring it. So you get green things, which are good, orange things, which are maybe resign and refreshes, and red things, which are potentially areas that you might be retiring. That might be because all of the technology behind the scenes is being retired, so that capability could be retired. Okay, but trying to make these things, palatable to the average business user, making them no code, so you don't need to be an expert. You just need to understand a little bit about graphs and how graphs are connected, which ultimately is pretty logical stuff. A process uses applications. That's noun, verb, noun. You've just described a graph, right? A fragment of a graph anyway. So let's build on that, right? So if we're starting to talk numbers, right? Again, we can give you the wrong answer to 5 decimal places. What we need to start to appreciate is that when you walk into an office and you give someone a recommendation, and you're potentially the bearer of bad news, are they going to believe you? Are they going to call you on that? Pull the the BS card. Are they going to call you on that and say, prove it? Okay, so this trust issue is really important in our field because you've heard us described as a trusted advisor, right? So how do we build that trust? I think it should be pretty obvious that in sport, it's a pretty checkered past. If the fans obviously are the barometer of the business, if we as enterprise architects are to get the respect and the trust of our colleagues in the business, we've got to be careful not to make the same mistakes that a lot of athletes have made along the way. I'm sure we're all familiar with the performance-enhancing drug sagas with Lance Armstrong and the Russian a whole Olympic federation was banned from the last Olympics. There's been ball tampering in cricket. So for us in Australia, where we had a really bad, embarrassing issue a couple of years ago, and the captain and the vice captain of our national cricket team were banned for years due to ball tampering. Bat corking, in baseball, people putting cork in their bats, to make the ball go further. There's been game fixing in rugby and in snooker and things like that. There's been some pretty bad things that have lost a lot of trust. So how do we learn from that in our field? So how do we build and earn trust in the enterprise, in the organization with what we're doing? Well, fundamentally, you've got to avoid that garbage in, garbage out concept I talked about at the start. If we start, making, poor decisions off poor data, you're going to lose credibility very quickly. Okay. So how do you avoid that? The first advice is don't obfuscate anything. I showed you just a second ago a no-code algorithm. Be transparent. Don't black box these algorithms. Don't make them some mysterious code snippet that's the realm of data science geeks in the in the ops research department. Make these things transparent and public to the users so they build confidence in what they're seeing because they know the logic. Okay, the logic doesn't have to be that complicated, but as soon as you start to leverage information or data you have in one place that you're confident of and leverage that to other areas in the business, now you can start to give some insights that are built off a very solid foundation. So be very transparent about those things. At the same time, you have to speak a familiar language, right? So we all know about reference models and notations that are familiar to people. Don't force some framework on them. Okay, don't take Archimate because you think it's great and start pushing it to the business. When they're perfectly happy with something like BPMN or business model canvas. Be kind of flexible about this. You can actually show the same content to people using different notations. That's the fundamental separation between a repository and the view or the viewpoint that you're trying to show. So don't get too hung up on the way you present things. Try lots of different ways. Be very flexible about how you might present things, because if it's familiar to someone, then they'll have a lot more confidence in what you're doing. There's this great quote at the bottom here, which is actually by Stephen M.R. Covey. I've got to get that right. He's the son of the late Stephen R. Covey, who is the author of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I'm sure you all know, and it's a great read. Anyway, Stephen M.R. Covey, he's a Harvard MBA grad in his own right. I guess I'll read it. Without trust, we don't truly collaborate. We merely coordinate, or at best, cooperate. It is trust that transforms a group of people into a team. So I think that's pretty profound, and I really like that. So trust is obviously the thing that, you've got to give a little bit, you've got to expose yourself a little bit to earn the trust of other people, and then ultimately you've got a team. There's another background. This is a wonderful quote. This invisible visible. These quotes. There's some ones out there. Another thing to bear in mind is you can't make something complex simple, but you can potentially make it understandable. So these are not opposites. These are fundamentally things that build together. So that actually comes from a reasonably famous designer called Hillman Curtis. He was around the turn of the century. He was one of the founders of Flash, the web design technology. So his full quote is, your goal is to listen. Sorry, I think this is a really good thing for us to remember as architects. Your goal is to listen, observe, understand, sympathize, empathize, synthesize, and glean insights that enable you to make the invisible visible. Okay, so I'll talk later about the skills you need as an architect, but you do need to be a bit of a poet. This is incredible. I think that quote really hits it nail on the head about what you need to do as an architect. At the same time, there's obviously Stephen R. Covey's famous quote is, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? So the animation we've got here is, just fundamentally a way of trying to, understand what's going on and put this in the hands of every user. So every user can navigate this and understand how things are hanging together. So whether it's finding the applications that need to be retired, seeing what they're connected to, however you democratize the management of these things is an incredibly important way to try to turn something which, most people might find to be a bit daunting and a bit complicated, but like I say, to hopefully make it understandable. I've got a couple more animations here. These ones, they're using a feature which we call graph view. Essentially, it's a generic way of navigating a repository and doing some ad hoc kind of queries or ad hoc impact analysis. So this one's just showing a graph notation with locations being exploded into the tin and wire that's underneath them, a whole lot of servers. So it looks like fireworks exploding on a screen, stuff like that. So when you've got a repository with hundreds of thousands of elements in them, you're going to need some pretty advanced ways of starting to understand it so that you can hopefully start to make some informed decisions. This one's a capability drill down. So you're just going from capabilities down to processes and goals and things like that, all the way through to the people. This one's using value chain notation, again, drilling into capabilities and processes and seeing how they're all interconnected. So again, don't get too caught up on the notation. These things are all very easily chopped and changed. This is an org drill down of organizations to departments to actors. Again, you might draw that as a tree hierarchy. Here we're just showing it as a graph. This is an information drill down from physical information objects to logical to conceptual objects. With the fields and all that kind of stuff. So lots of ways of trying to make something that could potentially be seen to be very complicated, hopefully understandable. Okay, again, we're not going to ever make this stuff simple, but we can hopefully make it understandable. We've been pioneering a whole lot of pretty intelligent stuff for a number of years now around machine learning and how you can use machine learning to actually build trust. One of the strange things about machine learning is invariably a lot of people see it as a black box. They see it as, oh, it's this mysterious thing, you just feed it and it gives you mysterious answers and then you might train it and all that sort of stuff. Well, if you use machine learning with a feedback loop with a human involved, you get some incredible gains. So we've got techniques where we can basically what we refer to as filling in the blanks. Okay, so ABACUS can look at the patterns in your architecture. That's not just the properties on things, that's how they're interconnected. It's a graph with, you know, attributes and all that sort of stuff. And if we spot a pattern, when I say we, it's, you know, ABACUS, you know, it is a little bit mysterious, but if we spot a pattern, we can start to infer things. You know, for example, if consistently when people are rating an application with a high criticality, so let's say, you know, criticality 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, that it needs to have a disaster recovery provision of gold, you know, gold, silver, bronze, you know, that's a pretty easy pattern to spot. Now, it's not always going to be 100% correlated. So again, there's going to be other factors involved, okay? So it's not literally a straight line. And you can even see that in the catalog on the right there, that not every criticality of 5 has got a DR of gold, okay? When it comes to confidence intervals, you can see there that it's recommending, our ABACUS's machine learning is recommending that the DR might be gold for this new application, but it's actually only 60% confident of that. So as an architect, you're consuming these recommendations and you're hoping to now speed up the good quality data, right? So if you can use these recommendations to you accept, reject them, if you can use these as a way of improving the quality of the data you've got in your repository, you know, all those blank rows and those blank columns in your sparse matrix or your sparse catalog or list of things, your portfolios, if you can fill those in with a bit more confidence, you're going to start to get better results out of that. We talked about maybe the time method, like tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate. If you're scoring an application, there might be some of the metrics or some of the underlying KPIs that are machine guided or machine suggested, and some of them are direct measured and trustworthy. And you're blending combinations of machine and human intelligence together to obviously get something that's even better than either by themselves. So it's an incredibly powerful technique that really has only been in the wild now with our clients for sort of 6-12 months, and we're just finding some incredible insights that it's starting to bring. It shouldn't really be underestimated. I'm incredibly passionate and kind of proud of the work that's gone into this, because actually it fundamentally starts to go on a holistic scale. Machine learning can start to suggest future states for you. It can suggest them. I'm not it's not taking us out of a job. The humans involved in reviewing and vetting and accepting, and of course as we accept the recommendations, that enforces them, and the recommendations get more and more confident. So we'll see where this goes over the next few years. We've got numbers of our clients are already embracing this, and we'll see what learnings their own machine gets. I mean, obviously it's different to every client. They're building their own intelligence, really. Okay, so let's assume we've got some trust, and we're not just freaking people out with our machine learnt stuff. We're actually validating things, and if you've got that fast time cycle of providing insights that are then validated, a monthly, quarterly kind of cycle. Who knows what? So you're delivering value consistently. It sounds pretty challenging, and absolutely, what are the skills that we need to be these superheroes, these EA athletes? So you've heard me talk about rock climbing. So I've kind of got to pretty high level in a number of sports. I was as a junior, I was a pretty high level swimmer. I went on to rock climbing and became very high level in that, and now running's now my sport. So I don't know if there'll ever be an event that combines those three sports together. I guess some sort of adventure racing, row gaining or something like that. Who knows, where you swim, climb, run or something. I don't know. That'd be pretty good. But needless to say, we as enterprise architects need to be what's referred to as a multi-sport athlete. You certainly can't be one-dimensional. You have to be multi-skilled. I'm not sure. I mean, I've put my new home, the England heroes, on the right here. So I don't know if you guys recognize them. Daley Thompson in the top right. He was world champion in decathlon back in the 80s. Then Jessica Ennis-Hill, she won the London Olympics, heptathlon, and then her protege Katarina Johnson-Thompson in the bottom right there, she won the world championships last year in heptathlon. So these athletes are multi-skilled. There's 7 sports in heptathlon. There's 10 in decathlon. I don't know if I'll embarrass Peter Collins. He's now a reborn modern pentathlete. So I don't know if he'll tell you about that. But yeah, so certainly being multi-skilled and multi-sport is really impressive. The other one there is Jan Frodeno. I don't know if any of you follow triathlon. He's the Ironman world champion. So obviously I am very passionate about this. My brother was very high level in triathlon. It's 3 sports, of course: triathlon, swim, bike, run. The Ironman itself is, I still believe, the hardest one-day event there is. It's a 3.8-kilometer swim, followed by a 180, so sorry, it's a 2.4 mile for the Americans, 112-mile bike ride or 180-kilometer bike ride, then a full marathon, right? 26 miles or 42.2 kilometers. These guys do it in under 8 hours. It's incredible. So they're amazingly skilled multi-sport athletes. So we as architects, we of course have to be part scientist, part psychologist, part diplomat. I'll look at that in the next slide, the sort of skills we need, because there's hundreds of frameworks that we might need to know. There's hundreds of domain or reference models, there's patterns, there's hundreds of different ways of presenting things to the stakeholders, right? Not just diagrams and even the notations there. So we need to be pretty talented. And, of course it is something that we are generally good at, and that's why we're revered in the business. But yeah, we need to be multi-skilled. We wrote an article a few years ago, must be probably 5 years ago actually now. We sort of coined this the 6 secrets of top enterprise architects. We sort of surveyed lots of people and built some patterns about what it was that we were seeing consistently. So these are the 6. I mean, I guess I'll just read them out. So a top enterprise architect knows what just enough architecture looks like. We talk about being constantly delivering value. Don't boil the ocean. Don't go into a black hole for 6 months before you deliver anything. Just deliver what's good enough with all the caveats that you need, with disclaimers saying, look, it's the best I could do with a month's worth of work, and then refine it and improve it. But use it with a trade-off between quality and time, and cost obviously. But that's the holy trinity of trade-offs. They can access and use data quickly, right? So of course, if you've got a repository, that speeds that up. But needless to say, they can pull upon all the different, frameworks and all those things. They've got a pretty big library of, things, or a pretty big toolkit of stuff in their back pocket. Having said that, they're very comfortable with uncertainty. If you don't know something, that's okay. We can find out as architects, okay? We obviously have some rules of thumb that we can follow, but we don't need to know everything perfectly well. We need to see the bigger, the whole for the parts. We need to see the big picture. But we still need to be focused on what the organization wants. Don't be IT-led. Don't be business necessarily led. It's the combination between those two. We talk about an alignment between, of course, business and technology. Sometimes the tail wags the dog. Don't get too caught up in outside in, inside out, top down, bottom up. All those different ways of thinking about things. The framework we've aligned ourselves with much more is around active modeling versus passive modeling. Okay, and I won't go into that. I don't have time, but it's a much more neutral way of looking at things, and it applies to you've got a modeling challenge that you're trying to do, because that's what we do as architects. So how are you going to solve that challenge? Active versus passive. But we can find solutions to impossible problems. There's, imagine being the CIO when, Jeff Bezos walks into your office and says, I want to be the #1, platform service provider in the world within, 5 years or whatever, when you were a book company, all those years ago. Now, we all know AWS is now, the largest business line for Amazon. They make billions and billions per year for it. So we can make these things possible. Absolutely. And we can obviously do it within the risks that we're dealing with. So, we can quantify that and go, yeah, look, it's worth having a shot. When you think about risk management and think about mitigating risks versus just accepting risks that you can't change. Have the strength to change the things you can change. The patience to tolerate the things you can't, and the wisdom to tell the difference. Look at that as a risk management approach. Make sure that you are answering the questions that you think you can answer with the confidence you can. That gives, of course, the value to the business when they need it. I won't spend too long on these. There's just a couple of quick sort of screen grabs there of different ways that people can present things. So again, you probably recognize some of these notations. You've got business process modeling notation in the top left there. This is actually all embedded within Teams too, by the way. Sorry. So again, part of democratizing EA, we think, is of course removing that barrier to entry. Making it frictionless. If you can just embed within the digital workplace that people are using, which we use Teams internally as a company, and lots of our clients do. You can put in Slack and Confluence, those other kind of collaboration environments. But just give it to them. Remove the need to try and find the stuff. It's right there when they need it. There's other notations here. The top right there, that's a finance dashboard. So unfortunately, you're probably going to need to learn a little bit about discounted cash flow and net present value and different financial modeling techniques, because the business absolutely makes their decisions based off that. Whether it's value chain approaches then, or business model canvas, these are all techniques that we might need to know and have at our disposal. Gantt charts, PERT charts, all these good things. These are all techniques that we know. Yeah, this is just a quick little animation to try to sort of talk about, the collaboration side of things. Okay, so what's happening here is, someone's drilling in to kind of identify things that are being retired, taking a grab of the URL that's being produced there, jumping across to Teams, and and starting a chat with the owner, the application owner there. So integrations with your digital workplace is going to be key to the success here. It's the best way to collaborate with people. We of course can have alerts and all those good things, and give outside of the tool collaboration, but collaboration right in the tool and working with your digital workplace like Teams or Slack is key to the success here. It just removes so many barriers to entry. The days of static PowerPoint reports or PDFs are pretty dead. I mean, sure, if you need them from an audit trail point of view, that's fine. Governance and stuff like that, and you can generate those, but don't use them necessarily as a decision artifact. Yeah, I'm sure we all recognize that team, Chicago Bulls from the 1990s, Michael Jordan down there in the front. So I was definitely, like, I guess most of us, a Bulls fan. So yeah, when the EA wins, everyone wins. I just don't know how many of you have seen the recent series that was put out called The Last Dance. It followed the last 3 years when the Chicago Bulls won 3 championships in a row again. So they won 6 in the 90s. They won 3 back-to-back. A couple of years off where Jordan went off and played baseball, funny enough. Anyway, came back and then won 3 more again. So this is sort of chronicling the last of his 6 championships. And Michael Jordan and the Bulls didn't win anything until they worked out how to work as a team. So Jordan worked with the front office. That's Jerry Krause there in the middle with the red tie on. Phil Jackson's the coach on the bottom right there. Until they worked out how they could work with the front office and the back office, get a team of complementary players. So you've got Scottie Pippen there, Horace Grant, Bill Cartwright, John Paxson. Until they got a team that could work together, they were struggling. They were getting beat up by the Boston Celtics. Anyway, so eventually they won 6, and of course we know Michael Jordan's arguably the the most famous athlete who's ever lived. But once he learned how to work as a team, absolutely the whole obviously franchise in this case won. So in the same way for us as architects, be humble, work out how to get the best out of all of the different people you work with, whether the architects, whether Scottie Pippen's the data architect and Horace Grant is the business architect and Bill Cartwright's the technology architect, who knows, don't think of it like that. But if you're the dream team, if your architecture office is the dream team, still work out how to work with the front office and the back office, and of course the entire in this case, city of Chicago would be their equivalent to make this happen. Absolutely, it's key to success is be part of a team. You remember that quote, of course, earlier on. So how do we get to be Michael Jordan, right? How do we get to be these multi-skilled, super athletes that can do everything? Yep, we got to do some training. It's necessary. Hopefully these sort of events that we're doing here just passes on, if we can pass on a couple of little, insights for you guys in your day-to-day job, this is, fundamentally what we need to embrace is that, we'll never stop learning. I did my PhD 20 years ago, who knows how many more I've done since then. We'll never stop learning. This quote, I love it, from Muhammad Ali. So I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion. Okay. I think that's definitely a pretty good way to look at it. That's the masochistic side of sports. Absolutely, it hurts. I can tell you, if you come and join one of my track sessions, it hurts, right? Kind of like reading 1,000 pages of TOGAF to get certified. That is definitely suffering. I certainly don't envy anyone who has to do that, but live the life as a champion, and I'll show you some of the benefits of being TOGAF certified later. But it hurts. It's pain. So there's all these techniques. Again, I've been, and Peter alluded to, I'm very data driven about my training. So there's a whole technique called periodization. It's all about breaking your season. So it tends to be a calendar year up into these peaks that you're trying to do. And you have these different cycles. You talk about a macro cycle, a mesocycle, a micro cycle. So it's like, what are you going to do each week, each month, each quarter? And you try to peak for the events that are coming, whether it's a marathon you want to do, whether it's a 10K, whatever it might be with running now, of course. So yeah, trying to follow these approaches, whether it's you probably all know about HIIT, high intensity versus maffetone, which is much more about base building and slow process. So there's a lot of parallels between the way athletes athletes train, which is fundamentally breaking the year up into these phases or cycles, right? That's what frameworks do, right? When you look at something like TOGAF, so frameworks that have a methodology, that is, frameworks like TOGAF have cycles. They even call it, the architecture development cycle, right? The ADM architecture development method, right? Or the wagon wheel colloquially. But it breaks things up into cycles and into phases, okay? So be phased about how you do things. So when it comes to selecting a framework, use that as one of your drivers. Is the framework fit for purpose? If you're going to learn about all these different frameworks and get yourself certified in something, ask yourself whether it's fit for purpose. Who is it going to address? What stakeholders is it going to answer the questions for? Of course, does it actually go between business and technology, or are you just taking a layered approach and then trying to work out how to, to dovetail them together? The OMG has, great layers, BMM at the top, BPMN and UML, but they haven't really put much work into joining them together, okay? Something like TOGAF, of course, does try to go top to bottom. So, think about, of course, making sure it's got coverage like that. Does it cope with levels of maturity? Is it a big bang approach, or will it let you get some easy decisions very quickly, without you having to, spend 6 months, doing a whole lot of, Zachman-esque, filling in all of the, the 5x5 or the 6x5 grid? Can you get some stuff out of it pretty quickly for people that are, time poor? But if it's going to be, kind of, maturity levels, is it future-proof? Are you going to outgrow it? Is it something that only really solves one use case, but not lots of them? Again, I still believe TOGAF's the best thing on the market we've got. It is a suffering to learn it and become certified in it, but it really does give you like an MBA. It gives you the bookshelf of what you need to know. It really does equip you with a toolkit that you can then draw upon. There's with 1,000 pages, you jolly well hope a keyword search will find what it is you need to know. Okay, so yep, a quick little shout out to some of the frameworks that are out there. So there's obviously the industry ones, like I've mentioned, like TOGAF and Archimate from the Open Group, and BAN, Zachman, things like that. There's government ones, in America, FIAF. There's different ones. In the US, we've got some here in Australia as well. There's defense ones. There's still a bit of a battle going on between DODAFs and MODAFs and NAFs and DAFs, and there's this UPDM, which is trying to sort of unify those together. And then there's obviously private ones, from the Gartners and the IBMs of the world. We've got one we call the Evolution Framework, but again, we're pretty framework agnostic. We certainly have embodied the experience we've had from successful deployments and tried our best, but we don't mind. We don't sell any of our frameworks. They're all freely available, so we're pretty impartial. But the one thing to be careful of is what we sort of call the Franken-model. Okay, just because you can make a hybrid pretty quickly, just because you can have, TOGAF and BPMN and BMM and, PCF, and, I can rattle off, another 10 acronyms that you might be able to mash together into a hybrid framework. It doesn't mean you should. You've got to be careful that, these things aren't, fighting against each other. Right. So that's, again, we have an incredibly, configurable repository. So, draw on our wisdom of how to configure something that is fit for purpose. You can just import, 7 frameworks together and end up with 3 versions of what is a process. Just be careful. Be careful what you're doing. It's easy to come up with something that's a bit of a Frankenstein. But yeah, having said that, we do have some pretty good experience with this. So again, I don't want to blow our trumpet too much, but we've been doing this for 20 years. We do understand what can work and what does satisfy most of those criteria. We do have this hybrid meta model. We just call it the Evolution Framework. It is a collection of best practice approaches that we've joined together. So we think it's fit for purpose. We think it does satisfy all those use cases we've talked about. We have a whole customer success program that goes through a number of use cases with you, and it follows this framework. So yeah, don't be too afraid of taking a vendor. I know I have to be careful of taking a vendor framework. I mean, absolutely, ours is still trying to just draw upon best practice ones. So we're not really trying to lock you in too much there. Because the old adage, a fool with a tool is still a fool, or of course in America, a fool with a tool is still a tool. So, it's only ever going to be as good as the people. We remember the Chicago Bulls, right? The people, this is a team, right? Don't let the tool tell you what to do. By all means, use it to make suggestions. By all means, use it to produce, views and insights that you wouldn't otherwise get. but you as the architect and the kind of the custodian of this stuff, you need to be adding your value to that, right? And making sure that it's not just following blindly what the tool says. Of course, it's could be wrong. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Use it as a guide, but don't use it as the be all and end all. So yeah, a shout out for certifications. So you can get your gold medal, you can get your badge. So we of course have certification programs. Certification, obviously requires you to demonstrate that you've got knowledge in whether it's frameworks or strategies or tools that can be applied. But it really does show employers that you have the skills, and indeed that's been validated. You can see there in that green square, the open group, kind of tell you you're going to get paid 10% more if you add the TOGAF architect title to your CV, right? TOGAF's got over 100,000 TOGAF 9, sorry, certifications now, and it's geographically global. So absolutely, if you're looking for what you might want to do as a certification, I'd look into it. Remember the Muhammad Ali comment, though, suffer for a while and live the life of a champion, though. It's well worth the effort, definitely. Okay, so look, let's just to sort of pull it back together again. So those were the 5 kind of areas we went through in trying to become an EA superhero. Pace yourself. Make sure you don't go out too fast, but don't dawdle. Constant pace, constantly deliver. Hit those personal records. I don't think every week, of course, but like the World Series, aim for things every quarter. I think is a pretty reasonable target to be delivering things that are demonstrably valuable every quarter. Build the trust through being open and transparent, democratizing this, putting it in the hands of the business. Of course, leveraging machine learning if you need to, but always reviewing it and using it as some checks and balances. Accept that it's a challenge. You need to be multi-skilled, and you're going to need to train to maintain those skills. You'll never stop learning. There's always new technologies coming out, new trends. So fundamentally, this is a journey. It will continue on. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time, and I can see there's maybe 5 minutes left to the top of the hour. So I did want to just spend a little second. I know I'm the first presentation in this digital summit. So rather than taking up a whole slot where we could have done a bit of a show and tell of ABACUS, I didn't obviously want to do that. But I did want to just make sure everyone's aware of some of the stuff that's been recently released. We have a continuous release cycle, so it's always being updated every month. There's no big bang anymore about the way we release product to the market. So yeah, these are some of the things that we've recently released, or we're soon to release in what we'll probably coin as ABACUS 8. So yeah, starting in the middle there, this on-demand loading. So we've done a lot of work to be able to basically surface things when people need them. So rather than obviously a big bang approach to filling up a repository or filling up a dashboard and things like that, make it much more on demand, and get much more responsiveness and much better memory usage there. So I know that doesn't worry a lot of you, because we host your stuff, but it worries us with how much it costs. So we're doing a lot of work to try and of course make the performance better and the memory better. So that's this on-demand loading. You'll see that coming out shortly. Okay, I guess going top left there. So configurable catalogs. So being able to actually configure things right there in the catalog, in Enterprise, being able to add properties to the meta model, change the way things are so that you don't need to jump back to Studio to do that. Similarly with diagrams, being able to edit all the diagrams and, auto layout and stuff. We've got some pretty good algorithms there now that we can use to, relay out things and make them much more pixel perfect, as we're calling them, so that they're much more presentable and zoomable and all that kind of stuff. Put this in your hands. We talk about democratizing, so bottom left there, feature based. So we sort of course, as a support organization, we support all you guys, but we have a fair bit of stuff we have to do, which we'd love to outsource to you guys. So putting this in the hands of your administrators on site, your own staff, being able to administer a lot of the stuff and not need to draw upon us to do that. So again, in the same way, democratizing this, pushing this out to you guys and making these features usable to the administrators. And then, there's been lots of UI UX improvements. You've probably seen some of those lately. There's some, some of those new notations you've seen, coloring, theming, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, lots of good stuff that's coming. I guess keep an eye on the release page on the website about what's coming out. And, all of you guys that we're hosting, of course, it'll just appear as you log in the next time, I guess. So with that, I think I'll wrap up. I hope there's well, there certainly is some time for questions. I don't know if there are any questions. I'll certainly let Peter host that and share that. But yep, thank you for your time. Yeah, obviously I've still got my voice, which is great. I've got my peppermint tea here. I'm about to have some. So thank you.
Tim, that's great. That really has been great. The sporting analogies work really well. So, and I can think of lots of interesting, exciting ways even to revamp our training courses. Actually,
You talk about your pentathlon, Peter. Have I put you on the spot?
Well, yeah. Thank you for the shout out on that. From the sports perspective, I don't know that my own achievements sort of warrant inclusion, but yeah, no, good for the sport to get a mention. Thank you. Cool. So we do have a few questions, Tim, and I think we've got time to answer.
A couple of minutes. Yep.
Certainly a couple of them seem to be framework related. So the first is, can you show briefly how to implement the FIAF framework in ABACUS? I know that would take a while. But is it possible for ABACUS to change an EA concept from the TOGAF framework to FIAF automatically?
Yeah, look, obviously I'm not going to try and show it now. Talk to one of the guys in pre-sales or wherever, or your customer success manager to get them to show you. So we support FIAF. We obviously support TOGAF as well. So the first thing to appreciate with something like FIAF is that there is content in there. We use a reference model. It has I can't remember what it's called, but it's got all the different services and things like that already categorized. I know it's got a services model or a process model with about 4 or 5 layers of hierarchy to it. So the concepts in FIAF will map to things in TOGAF, which then again doesn't have content. Now, it does technically have a technical reference model, a TRM, but when it comes to processes, TOGAF obviously says, look, use an industry reference model for whatever your industry is. So if it's government, use a government reference model, right? Now, that's where you might draw upon something like PCF, right? The APQC's PCF, they have a government one, right? How can you translate between the two? So meta models, we get back to our Franken-model thing, what TOGAF calls a capability and what TOGAF calls a process may not be the same as what FIAF does. That's okay, right? We don't mind. Okay? And because it's configurable, you can use the TOGAF meta model with the FIAF content. Okay, so now you're going to be adopting the TOGAF terminology, but using the words that are in the the capabilities and all that from FIAF, or vice versa. Right, you can obviously use the FIAF content, but use the TOGAF meta model. So absolutely that can be done. I guess the word is when you say automatically, it's not like there's a constant translation that goes on between the two. As you form your hybrid repository, so here you're going to be composing a meta model, and that's separate to the content, of course. Because we have the meta model, which is you can have components of any type and connections of any type, we're completely agnostic about how you want to do that. The notation, of course, doesn't have to match anything either. So certainly you can translate between the two, or dare I say, just adopt the two of them together, but you will have to think about how you want to present that to your users in terms of what terminology you want to use. Consistent terminology is important. You can certainly have translations for language, the French version versus the German version, but certainly what you're calling things, it should be consistent. So I don't know. That's I guess the best I can do, Peter, with that one in the sort of limited time. But yeah, talk to the people in our kind of services.
Oh, that's great, Tim. Another question, which I think sort of links on quite closely. This is concerning Archimates, but the question is, can we scale this back, or complex frameworks in general? Can we scale them back to only show certain aspects to certain people?
Yeah, good question. So yes, as much as I can lay the boot into TOGAF and say there's 1,000 pages and stuff like that, there is a maturity model that underpins TOGAF. When you think about the different levels of kind of expertise, you can strip back things. Okay, we've done some work actually to overlay some maturity models onto Archimate. Archimate doesn't have a methodology, I'm sorry, it just is a notation. Needless to say, we've done some work to put maturity models on that. Then with, of course, role-based access and permissions and all that sort of stuff, you can hide things from people, right? Aside from the, the verticals of, you only need to know your business line potentially, you can hide whole details. That might be just the attributes on something, right? So again, Archimate doesn't have any attributes, but if you put attributes on things, you can start hiding attributes. Sometimes you need to from a security point of view. You don't want to give out IP addresses and stuff like that, or, things. But certainly you can hide attributes, but you can hide whole sections of a meta model. In our evolution framework, we have 4 levels of maturity. So yeah, putting a maturity model on top of a framework is pretty key. We've done presentations about the 10 things you need in a framework, and yeah, maturity is one of the things. So that yes, if you're a junior or you're just trying to get started, you only need 3 things to model an enterprise, right? Some concept of people, some concept of process, and some concept of technology. And that can literally just be 3 object types with 3 connections between them. You know, we talk about that as the holy trinity. You know, it's like a triangle, and that can be enough, right? And then build it out incrementally. Now, you know, you're obviously revealing more parts of the meta model as time goes on. It may have always been there when someone says, "Hey, do you have a concept for risk?" You go, "Yes, let's just turn that on for you," and it's just hidden from that user, but it's obviously available to other users. Okay.
Thanks, Tim. I think we can probably just squeeze in. We've got 2 other questions, and we have time before the next presentations. Just very
Okay.
quickly.
Yeah. Sure. I've still got a voice. Yep.
Okay. There's a lot of data from different domains shown. What data should I focus on? I have data across many different sources that I need to collect. Is it all manual, or can I integrate to those systems? Keeping in mind that we do have a session later this afternoon on data integration, but maybe just to touch briefly on that.
No, thanks. Yeah, so I will do that one quickly. So again, I made the throwaway line of extract, transform, load, ETL. So ABACUS does have what we call adapters to lots of third-party repositories, and whether it's ServiceNow or your favorite Google sheet or your Excel sheets or SharePoint lists or whatever. We have adapters, and one of the really useful things that ABACUS lets you do is have basically a foreign key, what we call an external ID, as the master. Right, so we don't have to push our ABACUS ID onto any other third-party repository. We can use their ID. Now, what that lets you do is, of course, not need to change their repository at all. We can just synchronize with it and consume it continually and know when things have been added, when things have been changed, and ABACUS will just stay in harmony with these third-party repositories, right? So ABACUS can end up just being a bit of a hub, a data hub that does just join together these other perfectly good production repositories. And of course, what does it do? It gives you that line of sight from, otherwise disparate data sources. So you don't need to pull things into ABACUS necessarily. Okay, so that's the other thing to think of. Again, I talked about data islands and stuff like that. You might just have links to the perfectly good content externally, and that's fine. But yeah, as Peter said, there's lots to be talked about with that. But yes, absolutely. Bear in mind your garbage in, garbage out. Obviously we can, if it's got crap data or junk data in the third-party repository, we can replicate junk data in ABACUS perfectly well too. There are techniques in ABACUS that will do data quality. We can do some validation and data quality assessments and stuff, but you also can turn all that off and just have a replica of what might be bad data. So be careful not to do that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. And then this last question, what's a good approach to introduce EA to executives that don't know anything about it? Actually, we have the session I think that comes up next is going to touch on some of these.
Yeah, good. No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I mean, the first thing is don't overwhelm them with too much. Be layers of an onion about it. One slide. Obviously, the prettier that slide, the better. And then, if they call you on it, and they say, well, you're gonna have to justify that. It might just have a pie chart on it. It might just have a bubble chart on it. Who knows? Be graphical about it. Don't show an A0 landscape of your application interface diagram. You're gonna lose everyone straight away, right? Regardless of what notation it is. So yeah, one page. Single page, whether it's an interactive page, which of course we would advocate, and you can drill into it as you want to find more information. But think about that single page, which just tells people, the 5, things they want to know. What are the things that stakeholder wants to know? Is it just traffic lights for, the status of current projects? What is it they want to know? And absolutely just get that in the eyes of, get that in their hands or in their eyes, and take it from there. Don't ever do the big bang approach where you're going to write a 50-page report that's whatever 99.9% refined. But yeah, absolutely, that's again a whole topic in its own right, which of course is going to be one of the sessions this week.
Excellent. Okay. Tim, thank you for covering all those, and thank you for the very for the great presentation. We've had some further comments on it, so a lot of people have appreciated that.
Great.
Many thanks. You need to go and have a warm down session, I think, after all
yeah, I need a cool down now. Exactly. I cover that in 5K cool down. Exactly. Was that an interval session? Yeah, probably was. Maybe it was a threshold session.
Excellent.
All right.
For the rest of us, equally, we got an opportunity for a break now. We have our next presentation beginning in about 25 minutes on using modeling and self-service dashboards to support business and IT stakeholders. So please join us back here for that. As I say, that's in about 25 minutes. and have a nice cup of coffee or a break in the meantime. Tim, thank you again. We look forward to catching up very soon.
Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.